In the 1990s, Gothenburg, Sweden was ground zero for a revolution in heavy metal. And between 1992 and 1995, 3 bands would emerge as the founders of what would eventually be called melodic death metal. Of these 3 bands, one of them would create an album that would go on to become the standard that all melodic death metal albums and many metalcore albums would be measured against. But almost immediately after releasing that album, they would break up and wouldn't be heard from again for almost 20 years. Why You Might Like At the Gates. I would like to preface this video by saying, if you're the kind of person that doesn't like screaming at all, then this band won't be for you. That's the one and only warning you're going to get. Also, I'm going to ask for forgiveness in advance. I'm bad with names in the first place, and I'm especially bad with Swedish names. With that said, let's get to it. At the Gates formed in 1990, with Anders Björler on lead guitar, Alf Svensson on rhythm guitar, Jonas Björler on bass, Adrian Erlandson on drums, and Thomas Lindberg on vocals. All the band members had previously worked with other bands, but never really had much success. Within a short period after forming, they recorded an EP named Gardens of Grief, which caught the attention of Peaceville Records, and by 1992, they released their first full-length album, The Red in the Sky Is Ours. To say The Red in the Sky Is Ours is raw would be an understatement. The band was in the studio recording the album after only being together for a year. The musicians hadn't really learned how to write together, and much of it is Anders showing off how good he can be. You can hear the potential for the concepts these guys are working on, but it hadn't fully developed yet. I used to joke that instead of measuring these songs in beats per minute, they need to be measured in riffs per minute, because Anders just crams in as many as possible into each song. The first word that comes to mind to describe The Red in the Sky Is Ours is abrasive. This is the sound of the angst of youth with a chip on its shoulder. Thomas Lindberg's raspy cries sound like a man screaming for help while being murdered. At the same time, Anders' riffs are individually well crafted, but they are all just stitched together into a patchwork. The last minute of the song is typical for early melodic death metal bands. They always knew they wanted folksy elements in the songs, but couldn't figure out how to work them in. So instead, they just either tacked them onto the beginning or onto the end of each song. Through Gardens of Grief has more of a standard death progression at the beginning, but it isn't long before Anders starts stitching together unrelated riffs. once again, individually, these riffs are amazing, and you can really tell that this guitarist has a lot to say. He just hasn't figured out how to cohesively say it. Another thing I would like to point out is Adrian Erlandson's drumming. There are points in the song where he finds some very creative ways to make the rhythm work with some of Anders' more complicated riffs. The beginning of Windows has a short dose of brass instruments, and while at first it appears as just sticking a folksy sound at the beginning of the song, this time the band uses it to set the tone. This is the first time they successfully find a way to use traditional instruments with traditional sounds to successfully blend it with extreme metal. It's these kinds of sounds that would eventually go on to create melodic death metal of that era. I don't revisit this album too often. I throw it on every now and then, and maybe it's just my old ears, but there just isn't anything from this album on my playlist these days. "1993's With Fear I Kiss the Burning Darkness" is a demonstration of how quickly the band could grow. Instead of trying to cram in as many riffs as possible into every song, Anders instead chooses to focus more on each riff individually. The album is still very raw, but you can hear things starting to come together. "Raped by the Light of Christ," aside from its unfortunate name, opens with some very gentle classical acoustic guitars, which is followed up by electric guitars playing the same riff. Once again, you can start to hear the formation of something here. And instead of going on another tirade full of a multitude of riffs, Anders is relatively subdued here. And with the song coming in at just under 3 minutes, the song doesn't have time to get overcomplicated. It's short and sweet. Non-Divine reminds me of something from Death's Spiritual Healing. Even Lindbergh sounds closer to Chuck Schuldiner than he does himself. Granted, the album doesn't have the levels of production that Spiritual Healing did, but you can really hear things starting to tighten up in the writing process. In my opinion, the best song on the album is The Burning Darkness. At 2 minutes and 9 seconds, this song is about the average length of a Napalm Death song. So it has no time to waste. Anders gets straight to the point with his riffs, but still finds plenty of time to shine. Also, I'd like to take a moment to point out once again Adrian's drumming. The guy always finds creative ways to move with the riffs that Anders writes. In 1994, they released their third studio album, Terminal Spirit Disease. This album is more subdued than the previous two. It's a lot like this episode of Metalocalypse where the band is trying to play the blues, but their guitarists don't know how to slow down, so they end up tying cinder blocks to their arms to make it harder for them to play fast. That's what this album sounds like.
Try to play this.
We can't not play it fast physically.
Yeah, it's hard. All right, let's try something else.
Many of the riffs are slightly slower, and this is when you can finally start to see their vision for melodic death metal come together. The band also replaced Alf Svensson with Martin Larsson, and it's possible the absence of Alf may have affected some of Anders' writing. The Swarm does a great job of setting the tone for the entire album. The opening is an example of how you can incorporate folksy sounds with metal, and you can really hear these concepts starting to come together. This is what melodic death metal sounds like. No longer is Anders racing to fit in as many riffs as possible. Instead, each riff has more attention invested into it, and the overall composition benefits from it. After listening to the song Terminal Spirit Disease, it becomes apparent why they decided to name the album after the song. It just has everything.
Can you feel the pain I feel? And also sense of what is real? I'm lost in a world of tears. Can you feel the pain I feel? But so let go will never.
I mean, by this point, it's expected that an At the Gates song is going to have great riffs and drumming. But this song has a bunch of subtle extras, like the pauses where the vocals fit in, or how even though the vocals don't fit the normal verse-chorus structure, the guitars still find a way to create a chorus-like section while Lindbergh continues to belt. And The World Returned is a beautifully written classical piece. The addition of the cello really brings it together, and this is the first time we get a real introduction to just what the Buellers are capable of. You could easily throw this into any normie playlist and get away with it. If it wasn't for the vocals, you could easily mistake the Fevered Circle for a Crowbar or Down song. It has a lot of that 1990s New Orleans sludge metal sound to it, especially when you get to the middle. I'm half expecting Phil Anselmo to jump in and start belting out some lines. I don't know what I can say about The Beautiful Wound that I haven't already said about the other songs. Listening to it, and this album as a whole, really took me back to my 20s, and in the best way possible. This was really a golden era for extreme metal. I would like to note that there are some great riffs in this song. Around the middle, it shifts from a tremolo-picking riff to this dirty, offbeat sludge riff that just stands out from the rest of the track. This is an album that has grown on me more and more over the years. Even on my most recent listening of it for this video, I found myself thinking, man, I really like this album a lot more than I thought. And at this moment, I'm sure it's because of the recent re-listening, but all of these are in my extreme metal playlist. Great album, one of the best extreme metal albums of the era. By 1995, the band had a solid idea of what they were trying to do. After slowing things down a bit for the previous album, and a bit of growing beyond the first two albums, Anders found some middle ground between the two sounds of the band and created their magnum opus, Slaughter of the Soul. Slaughter of the Soul has one of the most iconic openings of all time. If you've never heard this song before, but you have heard other melodic death metal bands, this song will sound very familiar to you. These riffs and progressions have been copied and modified time and again from Europe to the United States. There is this one riff that sounds like Brandon Smalls made almost every Death Clock riff from. And then you've got this one that the American bands used a lot in the early 2000s. Under the Serpent Sun is one of the most cohesive writings from Anders on this album. Each riff flows into the next. Even when there is a sudden shift, it makes sense, and Adrian being the reliable drummer makes it work every time. If you've watched any of my previous videos, you know I'm a big fan of when death metal slows things down. But At the Gates is an example of how you don't have to really slow things down to still get an incredible melodic effect. Suicide Nation is probably the most boiled down, straightforward, melodic death metal song on the album. This is melodic death metal distilled down to its basic elements. If you want to get to the root of what melodic death metal was in the 90s, just throw this song on and you will have a perfect example. World of Lies has what's probably my favorite riff on the album. The opening riff goes so hard, I could put it on by itself on a loop and just rock out. Personally, I feel like it should have continued a little longer before the switch up, but at least they bring it back in the middle of the song. I mean, the riff is so good, it would just be a shame to not come back to it a second time in the song. The Flames of the End is a synth-focused song with gothic overtones and some industrial elements for good measure. It's a sound that bands like Moonspell would explore more thoroughly in the years to come. This is one of those albums where I could include many more songs, but If you think I should have swapped one out for another, tell me about it down in the comments section. I would like to know which ones you think stand out more than any of these. While you're at it, leave a like and a subscribe too. This is the first album I had heard from At the Gates. I picked it up in 1996 and I was blown away by it. In the early 2000s, I was living in Santa Cruz, California, and I was working in a screen printing shop. And we would rotate what was playing on the sound system. Most of the guys I worked with didn't like metal, so there were very few bands I was able to get away with, and At the Gates was one of them. There was something about their style that just appealed to both the hardcore punk guys and the skater guys. Lindbergh's style of singing is closer to hardcore punk than death metal, and maybe that's where the connection initially started. I mean, these guys were already listening to bands like Converge and Snapcase and Dead Guy, and At the Gates wasn't really too far away from any of that. And it wasn't just the guys I was working with either. Hardcore guys all over the United States were listening to At the Gates and adding just a little bit of their sound to their own. In the beginning, metalcore wasn't even a genre. It was just hardcore guys using some At the Gates and In Flames riffs. Sadly, shortly after the album's release, the band would break up. And even though there was a short reunion in 2007, we wouldn't get another album from the band for almost 20 years. Between the years of 1996 and 2014, multiple members of At the Gates would work together in another band called The Haunted. But that's a story for another video. Lindbergh would work on a lot of other different projects, and Larson would be involved in a few small projects here and there. And in 2014, the band would fully reunite and release their fifth official album, At War with Reality. As far as first impressions go, Death and the Labyrinth is as good as they get. Within the first 30 seconds of this song, you get this feeling that At the Gates are picking up right where they left off.
Behind the curtain, into ruins, words that drift into oblivion with every dawn. The world deforms, and as we fade, our truth dies.
It sounds like a natural progression from Slaughter of the Soul, especially considering 20 years has gone by and the melodic death metal sound has undergone many changes since.
With every dawn of higher rivers, the world deforms to a pale and sudden ash. Words without sound.
Heroes and Tombs, however, is closer to 2014 era melodic death metal. You can hear a lot of the elements from The Haunted in this song, which isn't really a bad thing. You can hear a lot of growth in the songwriting. I mean, this song sounds like it has been written by a group of guys who have been doing this for 25 years. I'd also like to mention that Friedrich Nordstrom's production on this album is top-notch. They couldn't have picked a better producer to work with for their comeback album. Order from Chaos is a kinder, gentler At the Gates, but not really. Unlike bands like Dark Tranquillity or In Flames, Lindbergh doesn't do any singing, but the band does some experimenting with atmospheric tones for a good chunk of the song. Towards the end, there's this one heavy riff, and even though it's short and doesn't get repeated, it sure does have one hell of an impact. I moved the track back multiple times just to hear it again and again.
Order from chaos, every thought to do. Order from chaos, profaned by the burn and the
At the Gates isn't really one for long songs. Usually they bring them in under 4 minutes, but the Book of Sand isn't much longer, clocking in at 4:28. But that's a long time for At the Gates. And this one plays more like something from The Red in the Sky or The Burning Darkness.
that is very eternal. Definitely watch it burn. We run like rats along the walls, rising higher.
It's basically that riff-heavy style that Alf and Anders were doing in those early albums, except it's done in a way that everything works together much better when moving between the riffs. Eater of Gods is a straight-up powerhouse. It punches you in the face from the opening riff, and it doesn't let up for the first half of the song. Many of the riffs have a Slayer vibe, which is something that carried over from The Haunted. When the song does its mid-song switch-up, it takes on a completely different vibe, and it morphs into a melodic death metal song from its era. But I would like to note that the change sounds organic and not forced. All in all, this is one hell of a comeback album. It's an absolute miracle that all the band members from Slaughter of the Soul returned for this, and to get Friedrich Nordstrom to produce it was the best decision the band could have made. Death in the Labyrinth, Order from Chaos, and The Book of Sand are all on my current melodic death metal playlist. I just can't listen to it when I'm driving because of, road rage. After the successful release and tour for At War with Reality, they entered the studio again, and in 2018 released their 6th studio album, To Drink from the Night Itself. This album would be the first without the band's primary songwriter, Anders Björler, so Jonas would take on primary writing duties. Anders would be replaced by Jonas Stahlhammer for this album, So from here on, I will be using last names only. So when I say Bjorler, I'm talking about Jonas and not Anders. Unlike At War with Reality, The Haunted does creep into this album a lot. Because at the same time, Bjorler had taken on writing duties for The Haunted. And A Stair Bound in Stone is a perfect example of that. Bjorler had even brought in the same producer for The Haunted's 2017 album, Russ Russell. Now, where At War with Reality, for the most part, picked up where At the Gates left off with Slaughter of the Soul, A Stair Bound in Stone is more of a reflection of Swedish metal in 2018. The production is tight. There is a lot of track layering. Gone are the days of slapping random riffs together and forcing them to make a song. A Stair Bound in Stone works because it doesn't take those chances, but for the same reason, it does suffer a bit. Daggers of a Black Haze is more in line with what I would expect from At the Gates at this stage in their career, if they had never broken up. It's more in line with what I was hearing in Slaughter of the Soul, but a bit more refined. Bjorler shows here that his brother isn't the only composer in the family, and in many ways I like this style of writing more. Unlike in the early era, folksy or classical elements of the composition aren't simply tacked on the beginning or the end. They are woven into the structure of the song itself and reappear throughout. We also get a taste of Stahlhammer's lead style, and while very different from Anders, it still somehow fits into At the Gates sound. Nameless Sleep is another song that blurs the lines between The Haunted and At the Gates. Except this song could be the best song from The Haunted in years. Much of the song feels like an early 2000s melodic death metal song, but Stahlhammer's lead is straight from the 80s. In short, In Nameless Sleep is just classic, raw energy and straightforward fun. The Mirror Black is my favorite song on this album. The slower pace is perfectly aligned with where I'm at this stage in my life. Bjorler really begins to show that he isn't just an imitation of his brother, that he genuinely has something to say as a musician. Jonas also seems to have a firmer grasp on transitioning from extreme metal riffs to classical compositioning than his brother does. It's possible that being a bass player may influence some of the structure of these songs. For example, his decision to include a double bass in the string section instead of a cello is something that I have only seen Jonas Björler do. All the other extreme metal bands that include string sections use cellos. Daggers of the Black Haze, In Nameless Sleep, and The Mirror Black are all playlist songs for me, especially The Mirror Black. After At War with Reality came out, for some reason I didn't keep up with At the Gates releases and missed this one entirely. My first listen through of this album was when I was doing research for this video, and I don't even know what the fan reaction of this album was. If you're an At the Gates fan, maybe you can tell me what your reaction was to this album's release down in the comments. Even though it strays from Slaughter of the Soul, I like this album. I'm not one of those people that thinks a band should stick to genre norms. People grow and change. Bands are made up of people. And when you change the people writing the songs, you change the sound of a band. And that was about to become very apparent with the band's next release. In 2021, they released The Nightmare of Being. And if At War with Reality was the comeback album that mostly rehashed old ideas for comeback's sake, and To Drink from the Night itself was Jonas Björler attempting to find a way to differentiate between writing for The Haunted and writing for At the Gates, then Nightmare of Being is him finally coming into his own. Spectre of Extinction's opening sounds like late 2000s melodic death metal, and in my opinion, should be a separate track itself. It sounds like a completely different idea attached to the beginning of the song. The real song starts about a minute and a half in, and it's comprised of more thrashier style riffs from the early 90s, some of which are reminiscent of 90s era Sepultura. Once it gets going, it maintains its fast pace, and Stahlhammer even gets a moment to shine towards the end. Being the first song on the album, I think it's a great tone setter. While not being anything special in terms of composition, it does get the job done. Right from the opening riff, Garden of Cirrus establishes itself as something different from your usual At the Gates song. Doesn't really sound like any song they have created before. And while there are some elements from The Haunted's The Deadeye album in the first riff, I was completely unprepared for the change-up. The shift to a slow jazz saxophone came from far out of left field, and it caught me off guard. I had to check and make sure the same album was still playing. The two styles separated by a minute of time was alone enough to raise an eyebrow, but the balls to then blend the two of them together is outright audacious. They need to be careful when doing this kind of stuff, or else the gatekeepers are going to throw them into the prog category. Touched by the White Hands of Death starts off with a classical composition that by itself is interesting, but it's just tacked on to the front of the song. The song itself is more than interesting enough without the front-loaded piece. There are some really nice riffs as well as some great transitions between them. Without the opening, the song would be a solid 3-minute song. Where Touched by the White Hands of Death fails to merge its opening classical piece, The Fall into Time excels at it. The orchestral composition is blended seamlessly with the distorted guitars, and the timpani drums serve to enhance the Wagner-esque sound of the whole thing. Even Thomas Lindbergh sounds like he belongs in the middle of all of this. At no point in the song does anything seem out of place. Even the bass-led jazz transition at the end seems to fit. Now at 6 minutes and 45 seconds, the song does feel a little bloated. And perhaps maybe a few measures could be cut down for time. But overall, the vision is clear. Cosmic Pessimism is a song clearly written by a bass player. The bass guitar is the root of this entire song, and this is Bueller at his best. Nowhere in the At the Gates catalog have I heard him play like this, and I want more of it. This song sounds like Trevor Dunn decided to write a metal song. The transition between the jazz section and the metal section doesn't sound forced, and even its transition back in the end makes sense. The vast majority of the song Lindbergh does a spoken word for the vocals, and it isn't until the 2-minute mark that he starts screaming. At 4 minutes and 31 seconds, the song feels like a 3-minute song. Definitely my favorite track of the album. Garden of Cypress, The Fall into Time, and Cosmic Pessimism are all playlist songs. You might get away with mixing Cosmic Pessimism into a normie playlist, but only in the right company. This is the first album since Slaughter of the Soul where I felt like At the Gates was getting out there, taking risks, and actively trying to develop something new, instead of falling back on things that worked for them in the past. In all honesty, it would have been far safer for them to have never returned and let the legacy be. But they took the risk of returning only to squander it by playing safe. And this album changed that. This isn't to say that the entire album works. It doesn't. But when it does it well. By 2022, Stahlhammer would leave the band and Anders would return. What would this mean for the writing style of the band? Would Anders simply take back over, or would Jonas continue to have input? Personally, I think Jonas has clearly shown that he has something to say, and I would like to hear more of it. And I would really like to hear an album where both of them are writing together. Supposedly, they're currently working on a new album, but as of recording this video, there is no release date. At the Gates have earned their legacy of being one of the most influential metal bands of all time, and they have managed to create one of the greatest metal albums ever. The only question left is, can they do it again? Now, I know there are a lot of references to The Haunted in this video, and because of that, I have decided to make them the topic of the next video. So join me next time on Why You Might Like The Haunted.